this Sunday on Rosemary Barton Live.
A new oil pipeline to the northwest BC coast would have the greatest economic benefit of any new nation-building project.
I am being polite. There is no project.
Alberta's pipeline pitch. Premier Danielle Smith says she has energy companies on board and support from some Indigenous communities to get more oil to market through the West Coast. Cenovus, one of Canada's largest oil and natural gas producers, and BC's energy minister will be here to talk about how realistic this pipeline push is.
This is a big day. We'll see how it all turns out.
Hamas says yes to some of Donald Trump's Gaza peace plan, including the release of Israeli hostages, but wants to negotiate on others. So what's next, and what does this mean for the nearly 2-year-long war? The Prime Minister heads back to the Oval Office to meet face-to-face with the U.S. President on Tuesday as tariffs keep hammering the Canadian economy. Is there hope the two countries can finally reach a deal in any sector? Our Sunday Scrum is here to talk about what's at stake. It all starts now on Rosemary Barton Live. Hey, thanks for joining us. Alberta and British Columbia are on opposite sides of the pipeline debate again, as the province's premiers push their plans for the future of the country's energy and economy. Premier Danielle Smith says Alberta is now pitching itself as the proponent to make a pipeline happen.
Without question, a new oil pipeline to the northwest BC coast would have the greatest economic benefit of any new nation-building project.
Smith says her government will put up $14 million and lead the proposal to develop and submit a formal application for it to be on the federal government's list of major infrastructure projects. It's something Smith says the province must do because private industry is not yet willing to commit the necessary capital, given, she says, existing federal oil tanker regulations and emissions caps. All of this has drawn the ire of BC's Premier, David Eby.
Premier Smith continues to advance a project that is entirely taxpayer funded, has no private sector proponent, is not a real project. When I've said, let's cross that bridge when we come to it, we'll see what the Premier comes up with, I'm being polite. I am being polite. There is no project. There is no bridge to cross.
What we've said is that if Alberta wants to be a proponent, they want to put the money forward to work as a proponent for a pipeline, that's their right to do so. When they bring it forward, like every other project, at that point, we'll take a look at what where they are, and we'll evaluate it at that time.
Major oil and gas companies will be giving the province advice, but those companies won't necessarily be involved if the project proceeds. The executive chairman of Cenovus Energy is co-leading the advisory group, assisting the government with its pipeline pitch. Alex Pourbaix, chairman of Cenovus Energy, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks very much for having me, Rosemary.
I want to talk about sort of what is different in this proposal that the province is putting forward. You have an enormous amount of experience. You tried to get Keystone XL, Energy East, both off the ground. Obviously, neither of them went ahead. So what is different about the proposal or about the approach this time, do you think?
Well, I think there's a number of things. I think, number one, I think there is a very much growing appreciation across the globe that oil and gas are absolutely vital building blocks of strong economies, and that we're going to need them for many, many decades to come. I think, 10 or 12 years ago, there was much more of a view that renewables, battery technology, were really going to render oil and gas obsolete in short order. And I think experience has shown us that demand for oil and gas continues to grow globally. Canada has some of the largest reserves in the entire planet, the strongest environmental regulations, and I think Canadians are starting to maybe appreciate a little more the importance of this industry to our economy, and I think more importantly, the ability of this industry to really help turn our economy around and grow our economy.
Okay, so let's talk about a couple of the things that, may stand in your way. You talked about strong environmental regulations. You are one of a handful of energy companies that sent a letter to the Prime Minister back in the spring calling on him to repeal the tanker ban, the cap on emissions, suggesting the Assessment Act needed to be reviewed or overhauled in some way. He instead has put in place C5, which allows the government to exempt certain projects from some of those kinds of regulations. So if the regulations themselves and laws remain in place, do you think a pipeline can still get built?
No, not without those changes that have been recommended by that industry letter that you referred to, and I think the Premier has been equally clear with the Prime Minister. The reason, the rationale why the province is going to be the initial proponent for this project is that with that list of regulations that you referred to in place, I don't think industry believes they are so onerous, so challenging, and create so much uncertainty in the regulatory process that I don't think any private proponent would ever consider investing the very, very significant dollars that are required to file this kind of application with that level of uncertainty.
One of the other things that you talked about there in terms of challenges for a future pipeline, some Indigenous communities, particularly the ones where at this stage the pipeline would likely go through, are strongly against this. I'm thinking of the Coastal First Nations Great Bear Initiative. The Premier of BC also has said that he is alarmed by the suggestion. They point particularly to the tanker ban as something that they believe is really important. So what do you say to either communities who have the concerns or the Premier of British Columbia to try and get them to at least consider this or be reassured by some of the things you might say?
Well, I think the first thing that we're going to do is really demonstrate through this advisory group that I'm chairing. We have strong Indigenous support on that committee, but I think it's an absolute priority for the committee that there is early and often engagement with Indigenous communities and to ensure that their concerns are addressed and that they have the evidence and the facts that they don't have to worry about this. The fact of the matter is, marine movement of oil is an extraordinarily safe transport system. We have double hull tankers, incredible improvements in safety, over the last 40 or 50 years.
Daniel Smith said that if this proposal is a test of Canada, that if it doesn't go ahead, if another pipeline is not built, it is somehow a failure of the country. Is that a sentiment you echo? Because it puts an enormous amount of pressure, not only on the federal government, obviously, but on those who don't think that this is the right path forward.
Well, I think the first thing we have to do is talk about the scale of this opportunity for the country. And, the Premier quoted a statistic a couple of days ago at that announcement where she stated that if Energy East, Keystone XL, and Northern Gateway had gone ahead, the impact right now today would be somewhere in the range of an incremental $50 to $55 billion a year in GDP. That's the kind of scale that further development of Western Canada's oil and gas sector can drive this country. I don't think there's another industry in the country that can remotely bring that kind of benefit to the economy, and that is providing tax revenue, jobs, massive benefits for the country. And I think, she said, and I would agree with her statement, that we have to work collectively as provinces. In the past, we have, the pipelines to move oil and gas around this country have largely moved north to south. That has exposed us to the risk that we have all seen over the past several months with respect to tariffs, with respect to trade issues, and frankly, having the vast majority of your product go to one buyer is probably not strategically sound in any case. And this is an opportunity to drive this incredible economic prosperity for Canada. And it's going to take a little cooperation, frankly, a little support from provinces working together.
Alex Pourbet, let's speak again as this gets underway and as you begin your talks with other people and communities. Thank you so much for your time.
Happy to do it. Thanks again, Rosemary.
First Nations in British Columbia have many different views on the pipeline, some willing to consider development, while others very vocally against it.
And there are those that are doing that and considering it. But I also say those that are impacted, especially on the coast, you know, with oil tankers, there's already oil tankers going back and forth, but if there's more, you know, that's where the concern happens.
This is something that, you know, is not nation building for coastal First Nations of British Columbia, that it very much, you know, goes to the heart of, you know, the risk being borne onto the communities of the Central Coast.
So multiple perspectives on the pipelines, but the British Columbia government has made its position pretty clear. Adrian Dix is BC's Minister of Energy and Climate Solutions. Nice to see you again, Minister.
Great to be on the show.
The government has criticized Alberta's plans or its proposal for a new pipeline. Your premier said it was vague and not a real project. Why is your government not willing to consider it as a project?
Well, right now there's no proponent, which means there's no business plan, no real project. There's no possibility of the take-or-pay contracts that would be needed to finance and support it. In other words, there's no market. There are dramatically better alternatives, even for Alberta and for the industry, at significantly lower costs. I mean, fraction of what this proposal would cost. It would lead to a real, I think, problem in terms of the social license we have for the massive economic development taking place on the North Coast that includes $50 billion in LNG projects under construction, but a huge number of clean energy projects, the North Coast Transmission Line, and mining projects in the Northwest. We have consensus on those projects in part because groups such as the Coastal First Nations know that there's a tanker ban in place. So that's important for our economy. And of course, it's our job as British Columbia to defend our economy and defend our coast. And we wouldn't be talking about this at all if this project didn't largely go through British Columbia.
Sure. As I'm sure you know, earlier this week, the former Alberta Premier told David Cochrane, and said on the line in social media, criticized the Premier and said that he was objectively a bigger threat to Confederation than Alberta separatists. How do you respond to the notion that British Columbia may be standing in the way of a national project that would bring wealth to the Canadian economy?
Well, we're doing no such thing. LNG, for example, a project of national importance. Who else says so? The Prime Minister, Mark Carney, and others. There were no LNG projects, zero capital investment when the NDP came to office. There's now $50 billion in projects under construction, and including the LNG Canada 2 and other projects that are available, many, many more in if I dare say, the pipeline. And what that tells you, I think, is that we are dramatically promoting economic development in BC. We've got a clean energy plan, our North Coast Transmission Line, another national project. We'll open up mining in the northwest of our province. So we heard Mr. Kenney's comments. I know when we becomes a sort of commentator and is inspired by Truth Social and Fox News, one gets inspired to make these kind of statements. I don't think they're very healthy, and they're certainly not true in any possible way. Premier Eby is a leader on economic development, and we're showing that every single day.
Maybe a leader on economic development within the province, but you know, Alberta feels that it has a case to make, and it would like to be able to convince the Premier and British Columbians, some of whom might support an oil pipeline, although of course not everyone. Is there anything that Alberta could say that would convince BC that it should at least consider this?
Well, remember, I think it's more than that. I mean, I believe we have a responsibility too. And we've shown that. You know that TMX has a proposal to dramatically increase the value and the opportunity in the pipeline that we as the people of Canada own, because we spent $34 billion on it Basically, they've written off more than half of that, the federal government has. And so it's already taking a loss it's certainly well north of $10 billion on that pipeline. So that was just built. Saw a 300% increase in oil from Alberta through British Columbia last year, and largely with destinations in the United States and in China. And we're working with them on other projects. So I think all of that's reasonable. Our point on this project, and that's why it's important, there's no proponent, no business case, is that the project itself is divisive, but it's not a real project yet. And so when people say, oh, well, you're putting things at stake, what exactly are we putting at stake? When we propose the dozens of projects we're putting forward, they have proponents and business plans and need some support from the federal government to have them go forward. And I think that's a way to contribute to Canada. And many of those projects, by the way, benefit Alberta as well.
Tell me how important the tanker ban is in British Columbia, because obviously things are shipped to British Columbia. The port is important, but how important is a tanker ban to other projects and things being developed?
Well, it's of course a federal policy,
yes,
and has been in place in some form or another. It was really started by a guy named David Anderson, who I remember more than you probably, Rosemary, but he was a significant figure in BC politics. He was a Liberal MP in the 1970s, 71, back then. The tanker ban has been largely supported in different forms. It was a voluntary ban for some time, and now it's in federal legislation. That ban's important in two ways. One, it protects the coast. And people will say, well, there's some tankers on the coast. Of course we serve communities on the coast. That's normal, and that's part of the policy that's in place. But we're talking about a massive increase in tankers on the North Coast, and people on the North Coast have generally not been supportive of that. And it's foundational in this sense. It's not a question of environment against economy, because the coast has an enormous value to our economy in and of itself, and salmon and many other things. It's that, but also it's foundational to all the other things we're doing. The port, and hydrogen, and LNG, and mining, and all the things that are happening in the Northwest. So it is significantly important to our economy and to our environment. That's why, as a BC government, we are absolutely working to contribute to the national economic vision by driving projects that are real, that we've developed consensus for, and we're going forward with. And that's our approach, and it's different than some other provinces. It's not, with great respect, a tunnel under the 401. It's not a pipeline with no business plan, no proponent, and no plan.
It is, though, an attempt to try and diversify where oil is sold, away from solely the United States and into other markets. And as Canada grapples with ways to diversify trade, you know, that is another argument that people who are for the pipeline put forward. What would you say to that?
Well, I say that we've done that, of course, recently. There has been a pipeline through British Columbia recently, the TMX pipeline, that has dramatically increased access to Asian markets. It's not full yet, but hopefully it will be. There's an opportunity to expand that pipeline's capacity significantly at very low cost. And we haven't been objecting to those things. In fact, we've been contributing to discussions around those things because we are concerned with the success of other provinces, including Alberta, who are our neighbors. So this is the way we've been acting, substantively on substantive projects. And there's no threats there. There's no problems there. We're just saying what we think. And in terms of this project, which would, in our view, negatively affect BC's economy and obviously the North Coast and our environment, we have significant issues that we've raised. And I think that's quite reasonable.
Minister Adrian Dix, thank you for your time.
Great to be on the show. Look forward to it again.
The Prime Minister is heading back to Washington for another face-to-face meeting with U.S. President Donald Trump. That's on Tuesday. It comes after months of talks with no relief so far from tariffs that have been punishing the country's economy.
I remain optimistic, but I think like you, like everybody, accept the urgency of the moment, wish that these agreements had been concluded weeks ago, but it doesn't mean we don't need to continue to do the work and try and get the best agreement possible.
Later in the hour, we'll talk about what to expect on Tuesday and if there's any hope the two countries can reach any sort of deal. But first, we'll turn to the latest in the Middle East and the potential breakthrough in the nearly 2-year-long war in Gaza. Hamas has agreed to parts of a U.S.-backed plan for a ceasefire. A former top U.S. diplomat will be here next on where this leaves hope for peace in the region. We are back in 2. Tens of thousands of people gathered in Tel Aviv last night, hopeful that U.S. President Trump's peace plan would bring an end to the war in Gaza and bring hostages home. Delegations from Hamas, Israel, and the U.S. are headed to Cairo ahead of peace talks tomorrow to try to finalize a final ceasefire deal in Gaza. It comes as both Hamas and Israel have agreed to some, but not all, of Trump's 20-point peace plan. Hamas has agreed to release all of the hostages, but has stopped short of agreeing to the entire plan unconditionally. The U.S. says the release of the hostages is just a first phase and cautions it is not yet the end of the war. This morning, U.S. President Donald Trump tells CNN that Hamas faces, quote, complete obliteration if the group refuses to cede power and control of Gaza. The president also says Israel has agreed to the initial withdrawal line outlined in his plan. Despite the apparent progress in negotiations, Israel kept up the military pressure last night as strikes continued to bombard Gaza, killing more than a dozen Palestinians. Ambassador Barbara Leaf is the former U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for Near Eastern Affairs under President Joe Biden, also former ambassador to the UAE, and she joins us from Washington. Nice to see you, Ambassador.
Nice to be here.
Okay, I'll just get right into where you think we are in terms of these negotiations that will begin, I guess, in earnest tomorrow on Monday. Hamas, though, has agreed to return all of the hostages. I know there are some conditions, but there are also parts of the deal that they don't seem to have embraced, including disarming. What do you make of how Hamas has taken this deal and their response to it?
Well, you're correct that the agreement as such by Hamas at the end of the week was focused solely on the first piece of the plan, which was the turnover of hostages in exchange for Palestinian convicts and detainees. And that, of course, is the single point of focus for the Israeli public. And for the Palestinian public in Gaza, they are desperate for an end to the war. So you saw immediately tremendous public support in both societies and the sort of surround sound of support, not just from the 8 countries with whom the president had met last week in New York, but also the wider international community. So pressure was immediately on both Hamas and Israel to move swiftly, and that's what's happening.
In spite of moving swiftly, I think everyone would agree probably in the right direction, there was an Israeli strike yesterday, despite the president saying, stop bombing, we're trying to get to a ceasefire. What do you make of that move by Israel, given that, the Prime Minister Netanyahu seems to have agreed to the deal, although perhaps not everything on the table as well?
I think we'll see great pressure over the coming 24 hours to cease and desist altogether. These strikes are being tagged as defensive in nature, but obviously to get to the very difficult logistical task of locating and bringing in, collecting all of both the living and the deceased, that will require a cessation altogether of conflict.
What to you is the biggest, the most challenging piece of this when they head into those negotiations on Monday? Is it how far the Israelis will move back from the territory? Is it what happens next? Give me a sense of what's the most challenging piece.
So I think by far the most complex piece of the puzzle is this international stabilization force. And really at this point, you've got total lawlessness, violent lawlessness in Gaza. And I'm not talking about the IDF operations. I'm talking about wherever you have Palestinians, you've got real lawlessness. There's no structure of governance or security.
Sure.
So the first order of business is to supplant IDF operations with a stabilization force, and that has not been put together yet.
What about the piece of the plan that says, and I think this is something that largely countries support like Canada, that the Palestinian Authority would eventually take over Gaza once there has been a reform. That seems to me like a very distant future kind of thing, but give me your sense.
Well, that has been a requirement on the part of the Arab Quint, as we called them, the 5 Arab countries that were involved in discussions both with the Biden administration and now are part and parcel of the group of 8 that has been in discussions with the Trump administration. And the centrality of the Palestinian Authority role in both governance and security has been a point of contestation. And you heard again the Israeli Prime Minister say over the weekend there will be no PA. But in fact, that is the only functioning vehicle of Palestinian governance. And as weak and corrupt and feeble as it is, that is an important piece of legitimacy for the Palestinian public and for the wider Arab and Muslim community.
You talked about the stabilization force. There's also this idea of a transitional body, the Board of Peace, that would include Donald Trump, Tony Blair, and other Arab leaders, of course. What do you make of this idea that there would be heads of state, former heads of state involved in making sure this holds?
Well, look, that's a sort of overt political wrapping to this whole effort. But really what is going to count and what is going to be quite difficult and complex to negotiate and lay out are the actual structures of governance. That board is not going to govern as such, but it's giving the parameters of political, international political support to this whole effort. The devil will be in the details of how and who picks the members of the structures that actually govern Gaza. And it will be really important to see Palestinians from Gaza clearly part of that effort.
I'm sure you know that Canada and a handful of other nations recognized the Palestinian state at the United Nations a week ago. Canada believing that was like a very key moment to do that in case that the war never ended. This was to try to push towards some sort of long-lasting peace. How important do you think that is or that was in getting to where we are now for Palestinian people?
Look, I don't think it was decisive in any way, but it added to the larger pressure cooker of international pressure on the parties and on Washington, frankly, to drive the parties to an end of the conflict. It doesn't change these political gestures by even important states like Canada, France, UK, don't change facts on the ground, don't change the parameters of life for Palestinians in either the West Bank or Gaza. Driving this conflict to an end and then charting both a road to recovery and a road to statehood is where things will change life for Palestinians.
Just quickly, do you think that this will happen, that they will get to a deal?
A deal to end the war, yes. Yes, because there is such public exhaustion in both societies. There's such political pressure. And this group of 8 is going to be on Washington and on the parties to ensure that the war ends. The long, long road of recovery, governance, security, reconstruction, that will be a very complex task indeed.
Ambassador Barbara Leaf, former U.S. ambassador to the UAE, former Assistant Secretary of State. Thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you.
Ottawa is looking to speed up the process of buying military equipment. The government's brand new defense procurement is part of a push to spend billions on defense this year. But will it be effective? The Secretary of State for Defense Procurement is right here and will join me after the break. You're watching RBL. The Liberal government is attempting to breathe life back into Canada's military and industrial base. Ottawa has announced a new defence investment agency with the goal of streamlining and speeding up the purchase of equipment to the Canadian military. It's a long-awaited and long-promised agency and comes as part of the Prime Minister's push for Canada to spend more on defence while relying less on the United States. The agency is mandated to work more closely with allies, including the UK, Australia and France, and will oversee contracts valued over $100 million. Stephen Fuhr is the Secretary of State for Defense Procurement and joins me live in studio this morning. Thanks for getting up on a Sunday and coming in. Appreciate it.
Good morning. It's a beautiful 24 degrees outside right now.
I know. It's not a terrible time. I know. You said when this was announced that the government never got it done because it's very, very difficult to do. What makes it so difficult to do, and how is this going to solve these issues?
I think the way this is designed is unique. No one's been able to do it this way. This agency has its own authority. It's got contracting authority. It's got its own resources, and it's got its own people. There's been other kicks at the cat. I think the Conservatives tried to do something like this. They ended up with some sort of ADM secretariat within PSPC that didn't change really any structure, just added a piece to the puzzle with the legacy structure in place. And as a result, I think their defense spending fell below 1%. So this is uniquely different. It's structured in a way to succeed, and we're going to make it work.
One of the things that is often a big problem with defense procurement is the fight between, as you say, sort of the procurement arm of government and D&D, the national defense, and what the military want. How does that solve that kind of ongoing bun fight between different departments?
Well, Well, we have D&D folks working in the DIA. So all these folks, we have people from ISED, we have people from D&D, we have people from PSBC, Coast Guard. We're all working together. So the relationship's a lot closer. The agency's solely focused on this. If you think about it, the legacy way of doing it, it was spread out. So, oversight was fragmented, duplication of effort. It's very difficult to believe that there wasn't duplication of effort with 3 large departments of this government working on the same project. So this thing is set up to succeed, and we're gonna make it work.
So you're only looking at projects over $100 million. What is first on the list?
For now.
First couple of things on the
list?
list.
For now. Submarines I was involved in that before this agency was stood up. That's on the list. There is a list of 5 or 6 things that we're going to work on right away. They're very late in the procurement process, so we're just going to try and they lacked funding, essentially, is what they lacked. So we're going to make sure that we get contracting authority and funding in place to get those things going. And then we'll port in procurements. Like, it's not like those departments are going to come in and just dump everything on our desk. We have to bring them in an orderly fashion so they transition in, and we'll do that over the coming months.
You say for now it's only $100 million. Does that mean you will take on smaller projects later?
We'll look at it because, this is I keep saying DPA because that's what we were calling it in the campaign. DIA, right now it's $100 million, so we can focus on the big ticket items. Version 2.0, or the final version, which will be 8 to 12 months from now, we'll reevaluate if that floor makes sense. If it doesn't make sense, we can change it.
Okay. You mentioned submarines. That is, I know, a big priority for the government. You, I think, are looking at 2 different options. How soon should we expect a decision on that point?
I want to move it as fast as it can move. I've talked to both contractors, and I've signaled to them that we want to move quickly on this. I think the public-facing timeline on this was contract award in 2028. I think we can do that a lot faster. This is going to come down to economic benefit to Canada, and they're both playing ball pretty substantially, so that's exciting for us. The Navy said both machines meet their high-level mandatory requirements, so that's good. Yeah. And both countries are interested in working with Canada, so I want to see how far we can leverage that into a relationship between Canada and South Korea, or Canada and Germany.
Okay, F-35 review. I know you've been asked it many times now. What is the holdup in the review process?
We're taking our time. I mean, the Prime Minister will make a decision when he's ready. The more you look at this, the more complex it gets. It's not slowing anything down. We have 16 aircraft in various stages of production at the manufacturer. There's infrastructure being built out at the 2 main operating bases, and when the PM's comfortable with making a decision, he'll make it.
Is it possible to get out of the contract after the 16?
I guess anything's possible, but that's not what I don't think that's the direction we're heading, but there'll be a decision, and we'll make it when we're ready.
There does seem to be some interest, though, in a mixed fleet for obvious reasons. Arctic sovereignty, to have better alliance with Europe, which we're trying to do through various ways. Is there interest in the Gripen, for instance, to having a few of those to help interoperability with other countries?
There is pros and cons with every option you look at. And you just have to make sure that the option that you pick has way more pros than cons. But there's no perfect solution. There is some solutions that are starting to appear that they may be better than others. But again, no decision's been made, and he'll make that decision when he's ready.
But a mixed fleet is part of what's on a conversation?
It's a possibility. There's lots of possibilities.
Is this becoming an issue with the president, though, as the Prime Minister deals with bigger negotiations? Is that something that will be a factor in the decision?
I don't think so. The U.S. cut its orders of F-35s this fiscal year in half. Right. So I don't know if that, I am not involved in those conversations. No, that's a Dominic LeBlanc, Prime Minister Carney conversation with the White House and their staff. So I don't know. But again, we're a sovereign country. We'll make our own decisions and we'll stand on our own 2 feet.
I get that, but if it's being used as leverage, as a point of contention financially.
Don't know the answer to that.
But in your mind, as the person running this, that's not something you've been asked to consider?
No, I'm not considering that.
Okay. Let's go back to the idea of the mixed fleet then. What would be the benefit of that?
What would be a benefit of a mixed fleet? Well, you think about a toolbox full of capability. And it could be airplanes, it could be anything else. You want to have, instead of just having the crescent wrench in that toolbox, you want to open up that toolbox and look in there and consider what the threat is that you're facing and which tool in that toolbox can deal with the threat that you're facing. The immediate threat, the long-term threat. I mean, if you can go out and deal with the threat on day one, that's great. But what happens if you have to persist in that space for months and months and years? Is that tool that you use, is it the right tool to do that job? So that's a very, very simplistic way of looking at it. But we need to have a whole wide range of capability sets to deal with all the eventualities that we could face.
How quickly can you spend money? Because that is often the problem with procurement, right? It's getting the money out the door fast enough, and in this case, we're trying to meet some targets.
Yeah, I think we can spend it a lot faster. I mean, the budget will reveal exactly, where the money is going to be living. This agency has contracting authority, and we'll use. I mean, there's many ways you can do it. Like we could use commercial contracts in some cases, not in every case, but I'm being told, I'm not an expert on this, but commercial contracting is a lot faster. So I would hope that we consider using commercial contracts where appropriate as much as we can to help get things going. There's a whole bunch of different things we can do from the process and procedure side that I will be very, very focused on making sure we use the right process for the right procurement to make sure it goes faster.
Okay, I appreciate you coming in. It's a lot of money, so that's why people should care about it, and it's going to...
Of course, and we want to get benefit jobs and stimulate ourselves while we spend this money.
Okay, nice to see you.
Thank
Appreciate
you
very much. That's Stephen Fuhr, Secretary of State for Defense Procurement. As we were talking about there, the Prime Minister set to meet with the U.S. President on Tuesday as pressure at home is mounting for a trade deal as new tariffs on lumber are set to come into place this week.
A message to the Prime Minister. You're going down there Tuesday. You better fight like hell. Don't roll over and keep fighting.
So what are the chances for success in lifting or even reducing tariffs in any sector? The Sunday Scrum is standing by. You're watching RBL. Prime Minister Carney on his way to Washington this week, and CBC News has learned the government is hopeful about a potential deal on the tariffs on steel and aluminum.
I have lost the illusion that we should predict in precise time when we might get to an agreement. An agreement can take many different forms. My view is an agreement is something that would improve the circumstance that we're in today.
He promised that he would negotiate a win with the United States by July 21st. Where's the win? Since Mr. Carney took office promising to be a brilliant negotiator, American tariffs on Canada have more than doubled, and they have much broadened.
So what should Canadians expect from the Tuesday meeting? Let's bring in our Sunday Scrum. Kathleen Levesque is a parliamentary reporter for the National Post, Emma Graney with the Globe and Mail in Calgary, and Rob Shaw, political correspondent for Czech News. Catherine, I'm going to start with you. I mean, there's pressure certainly on the Prime Minister to come away with something here. They're trying to manage expectations. What do you think is the likelihood there'll be some sort of movement?
Yeah, I mean, they're working very hard to try to temper expectations because any mention of a deal, you never know how that might happen. It might go sideways, with President Trump. But of course, I mean, look, we're talking about several ministers coming with the Prime Minister, Anand, Joly, and LeBlanc. I think it's fair to say that we can expect something to happen on the industry front. I don't think we should hope that there will be no tariffs moving forward on steel and aluminum, but maybe lower tariffs, because this is having very real effects on industries in the U.S. For instance, F-150s, those big trucks that a lot of Canadians love and Americans too. I mean, the stockpiling of the aluminum is going to be, finished soon. So we can maybe expect higher prices. So I don't know for sure what will happen in the next few days. We don't even know how this meeting really came to be, if it, it was Carney's initiatives or Trump's initiative. But one thing is for sure is that expectations are very high at the moment. And if there is no deal at the end of this, there might be consequences, and there will be a lot more political attacks of us having elbows down.
For sure. It's interesting, though, Emma, that the goal now, as Catherine and I are discussing here, is not just removing tariffs, which is what everyone would have liked to see. It's just to have them lowered and for them to be predictable in one sector. I mean, that's a pretty different conversation than the one we were having during the election campaign, obviously.
100% it is. And I think that idea of lowering expectations before Prime Minister Carney goes into these meetings is exactly the messaging that we're seeing out of Ottawa right now. Because do you manage to get rid of it all? I mean, probably not. No, not at all. But we are heading into the renegotiation next year of USMCA, like the US Mexico-Canada trade agreement. And that's going to be a massive, massive deal for all three countries involved. And that's going to be a really hard task. So I think at this point, Prime Minister Carney has to kind of walk this almost a bit of a tightrope. We want to see less tariffs, but also don't make the president too mad, because then you don't know what he will do. So it's a tough dance, right? It's a tough dance move to have to do there. But I guess we'll see what he manages to bring out of that, because you're right, we have seen some movement on the tariff issue. So there are a lot of industries out there hoping that Carney can come away with some wins for sure.
Yeah, Rob, what do you think? What do you think, I guess, is the bar for success is kind of the question.
Yeah, well, not giving up any more concessions to get almost nothing in return would be a good bar. I like the Prime Minister's brand is at stake here, right? And those Polyev attacks, you heard a clip of it, they're starting to land. He at one point in that scrum said it would be better for Canada if the Prime Minister just went and hid under a rock, because every time he meets a world leader, the tariff situation worsens. And the idea of this master negotiator, the Trump whisperer, we now have the 51st state rhetoric come back by Trump in a speech to generals. Like, it feels like there's a sliding backwards or worsening. And so the brand of the Prime Minister, he needs to come back with something, but he also needs to show a respectful, on the same level world leader meeting in the Oval Office. And Rosie, you're going to be analyzing that thing like frame by frame. It is so risky. The handshake, the clothing, the people in the room, everything gets kind of micromanaged and overanalyzed, and you can't control it. It is a hugely risky trip to go on.
Yeah, I would wonder, Catherine, if given that we're expecting some movement on the Middle East tomorrow, potentially negotiations, I also don't know how focused the president would be on this topic, given that he's deeply involved and has a lot riding on those talks between Israel and Hamas as well. So it's good to get in the room, but I just don't know how much of a priority this could be for Donald Trump.
Yeah, I mean, on top of all that, I mean, Prime Minister Carney and President Trump are going to be meeting on October 7th, we know, which will be the second anniversary of this, those horrible attacks. But yes, I mean, you're right. The focus will be kind of all over the place, so I think it will be a little difficult to really try to, get to a deal. Officially, this visit is really about looking forward to the review of CUSMA, which is coming up next year. But yes, you're right. I mean, certainly there will be a lot of talks about the Gaza peace plan. I know Canada has opened the door to maybe playing a role in the aftermath and trying to, stabilize the territories, the Palestinian territories. But I think there also is a risk, there might be a reporter asking a question, rightfully so, about, well, President Trump, what do you think about Canada recognizing the state of Palestine? I mean, did this help at all in the peace plan? And so we really don't know how this could happen. And certainly I think, it'll be very hard for Canadian officials to try to stay focused on trying to get a deal, trying to get a win, and we might see a bit of rambling on President Trump's part.
Yeah, and I think, Rob, too, I mean, I'm just going to you because there's another round of tariffs coming on softwood lumber in a week's time. Also, if you come back and you've got reprieve for one sector and not another, that also creates challenges, too.